Welcome everyone to lecture number 9. This one's entitled Growth of the Market Revolution, Part 1, The Rise of Industry. As that implies, there will obviously be a Part 2, which I'll try to upload by tomorrow. Now, just know that I'm going to put on Edmodo a brand new video log for these. Please do not use the same old video logs. There's going to be a completely different one for this one and also for part 2. They will be due Thursday and Friday respectively. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into our lecture tonight. Now, you may remember that while America was a colony, they lived under an economic system known as mercantilism. Now, this was centered under the idea that colonies existed for the benefit of the mother country. An individual or a joint stock company would get a charter from the king, come to America, establish a colony, gather raw materials, send it back to England where it would be produced into a product of some sort, sold back to the states. As states emerge, and we become the United States of America, mercantilism doesn't exactly go away. A type of pseudo-mercantilism emerges, where now states are going to issue charters to various individuals or businesses. And this is why state banking was very, very important to states, especially to southern states. They would issue charters, for instance, for land ventures. This is how a state would make money. They would have so much land, and they would allow individuals to go out there and purchase the land and to either cultivate it or use it to entice others to come, and the state would make money this way. They would allow different corporations or even monopolies to build roads out there. And so this is a type of mercantilism, but it's going to eventually be supplanted by capitalism. And it starts with this guy you see pictured here on the right, Adam Smith, who talks a lot about our self-interest, the driving force behind any market. You and myself and all people want things. You'd like to have new shoes and go to the movies and download the latest music. You want to go out to eat with your friends. You want to have a car. So those are things you want. So your self-interest then motivates you to go get a job. Most of us get jobs. We want to have jobs that we like, but we really are getting the jobs so we can have the income needed to purchase the things that we really want in life. This is what motivates us with our self-interest. Adam Smith called this the invisible hand. It's an incentive that you don't actually see, but we're guided by this. You want to choose what's in your best interest, but also, in essence, you're choosing what's in the best interest of society. Jobs are created because people want to have money to go buy nice things. So society benefits, you benefit. And again, this comes from Mr. Adam Smith, who wrote this book called Wealth of Nations in the year 1776. Now, let's talk about agriculture, because this is going to become the basic backbone of the American economy, and it's this plant known as cotton. Now, in early colonial period, tobacco was king. But over the decades, tobacco becomes less and less important. In fact, after the American Revolution, because of Republican principles and the idea of equality, there are many Southern slave owners who start to free their slaves. And it becomes obvious to most people that within a few decades, slavery isn't even really going to be a needed thing in the South until cotton comes along. And cotton's going to change everything. This gentleman, Eli Whitney, in 1794 will obtain a patent for what he calls the cotton gin. And the word gin is the abbreviation for the word engine. Now, cotton is a very labor-intensive product. It's a plant that grows these cotton balls, and these balls are loaded with seeds. So a human being has to go out not only pick cotton, but then bring it back into a warehouse and by hand pick all the seeds out of it. The average man could pick enough cotton to make a bale of cotton about 10 pounds worth of bale of cotton a day. With the cotton gin or cotton engine now, you could bale about 100 pounds of cotton a day. And it was a very simple machine. You simply put the cotton in one end, you crank the arm, and all these teeth would go through it, raking the cotton. All the seeds would fall into the pan here, and clean cotton would come out the other end, thereby cutting the work in half. This will greatly enhance America's economic importance in the world and create industry in the north and agriculture power in the south. Like I said, it is labor intensive, and where Eli Whitney actually originally envisioned, because you'd need less labor, it would help eventually end slavery. What's actually going to happen now with new states like Alabama and Mississippi being added, more and more people are going to want to buy more and more land to plant cotton. That's where the labor comes in. Planting cotton, growing the cotton, and then harvesting it. Literally, you have to go out picking it by your hand. You need hundreds of workers to do this. All of a sudden, slavery, which seemed to maybe start to die out in the 1780s, going into the 1790s, is now going to be totally reinvigorated. More and more Southerners are going to want to buy more land, plant more cotton, and they're going to need more slaves to do this. Now on Thursday, we're going to go into this a little bit more in detail, how slavery starts to become more and more of an important part of the Southern economy. But I do want you to know that cotton is the backbone of the American economy. It explodes in agriculture, but it also explodes in manufacturing. Textile mills in the north will be created. 1798, another interesting thing comes along. Eli Whitney files for a patent on this as well, interchangeable parts. Now, he's not the guy that actually invents interchangeable parts. That interchangeable parts have been around a long, long time, but he tried to get his own patent on them. And what do we mean by interchangeable parts? Well, you're now making machines that are making small pieces that fit on other machines. For instance, let's look at this picture here, this diagram of the cotton gin. What if my crank was to break here? Well, the way it used to work, I'd have to throw the whole engine away. But now, by making pieces that fit onto other machines, I can go and simply buy another crank and fit it on. If my pan was to wear out, I can just go buy another pan. And that's the way it's going to be with all the machines. Interchangeable parts is now going to lead to mass production. We're going to have multiple machines doing multiple tasks for us, and now we're going to have a lot of cotton, which is going to lead to textiles, fabrics, and cloth, and mass production. It's also going to lead to individuals creating weapons as well. Mass production especially will work in the musket industry, where they'll be able to produce muskets on a very large scale now, because if one part of a musket breaks, it's easy to go get a piece just to fix the one part instead of throwing the entire gun away and buying a whole new gun. I also want to talk to you about this guy, Samuel Slater, who is known as the father of the factory system. He's the guy that brings British textile technology to America. The Industrial Revolution begins in England. They're the ones who first created all these water-powered engines in their textile industries. Now, it was against the law to bring that technology to America. And Sam Slater was a young man. He was only 21 years of age, working in these textiles in England. He begins to read in newspapers where Americans are basically begging for some sort of help. Obviously, as I said, it's against the law. It says, he was aware of the fact that this is against British law, but he decides to basically memorize the makings of several of these machines. He gets on a boat, comes to New York in 1789. There he meets a man named Moses Brown. He takes a piece of paper and he begins to draw out what these machines look like. This is what convinces Moses that this young man, Samuel Slater, knows what he's doing. And in 1791, they begin to build their first textile mill, water-driven engines to take fabrics. In the beginning, it was wool. In the beginning, they did this with wool. And it's what these machines did is a process known as combing. You would take the wool, then later on obviously cotton, and you would comb it until it became fine, thin strings, yarn with wool and strings with the cotton. So you could create fabrics with it and eventually then spin them into clothing. So a whole industry is going to explode. These water-powered mills now that we have are going to start to dot the landscape all over the Northeast. Just to give you an idea, in 1809, there are several hundred mills in the Northeast, and each of them have these spindles on them. There's about 8,000 spindles that are water-driven in these several hundred mills. Like each mill has 2 to 4 to 10 spindles in there spinning yarn into fabric. By 1817, you have over 333,000 spindles in over 1,000 of these mills dotting all over the Northeast and now going into the Northwest. America, too, it was very easy to do this here. We have an overabundance of natural resources. There's a lot of cotton, there's a lot of wool, there's also fast-flowing rivers that was easy for the mill to tap into for its energy source and also for its transportation. Of course, Britain wasn't just going to allow this to happen. They're going to try and fight. Britain and America go into basically a manufacturing war. Britain begins to buy up U.S. cotton. Now, they were at a huge advantage with this because they controlled the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this is the time period when the British Navy is impressing American merchant sailors. So they control the Atlantic Ocean. They controlled all the shipping that took place. So they could ship cotton from the U.S. to Great Britain much cheaper than Americans can ship anywhere in the world at this time period. The British government allowed for low interest rates for their industries. So when they took out loans to build machines and build factories, this made it very cheap for them. And they had a very cheap labor source that they can pull on in England. England is very overpopulated. So a lot of people were willing to work in the factories for very, very little money. So they were able to produce cloth and they could sell it much cheaper than in the U.S. to the consumers here than any U.S. company could. In fact, many times they would slash their prices just so they can drive U.S. companies out of business. Well, America's not just going to take this, right? They're going to fight back. They're going to respond primarily with tariffs. Now, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. And the very first time America passes what's called a protective tariff, which is a very high tax, is in 1816. Now, how does this help? Okay, well, let's try to make this sound simple. You go to the store and you're going to buy a jacket. You see a jacket that's been imported from England and it costs $4. It's very cheap. You see an American jacket that looks very similar, but it's going to cost $8. Patriotism goes right out the window right now because you want the cheaper product. So you buy the British-made jacket for $4. Well, now we put a tax on it, this tariff. Now you come into the store and that jacket is now $10 because of the tariff on it. The American jacket, which was, what did I say, it was $8. Well, maybe they raise it just a little bit because they see now that they can make a little bit of profit here. So the American's going to raise a little bit, maybe to $8.50 or maybe to $9. So that he's still cheaper than the British jacket now. Now your sense of patriotism might set in and you'll buy the cheaper American-made product. This is why tariffs become very, very important. 1824, 1828, they keep raising these protective tariffs. Now, this always angered Southern planters. They didn't like the tariffs. See, tariffs are what we call reciprocal. In other words, if America raises its taxes on imported goods, then when we export our products to Europe, they're going to raise their tariffs as well. Southerners have to sell their cotton in an unprotected world. So when they sell their cotton to Britain, Britain is putting a high tax on that. They're putting tariffs on it as well in response to what America's doing here. These tariffs were to help northern industry, not southern agriculture. On top of that, because again, the South has no industry. There is no industry in the South at all. So anytime they want to buy any product, clothing, tins, brass items, cups, plates, boots, shoes, boots, brooms, all kinds of things they need to buy, they have to buy it from northern industries. Prices are high in the north. So the southerner always feels like he's getting it from two different directions. He's paying high taxes when he sells his product to England, and he's paying high prices for products he needs to buy in the north. Also, remember, we've said this in class, anytime the government starts passing laws, and in this case it's tariff laws, what do the southerner immediately begin to scream? Do you remember? You're thinking it? I bet some of you are saying it in your head right now. States' rights! States' rights! They scream this because they're always afraid that if you can raise my tariff, you're going to eventually go after my slaves. Shut up! I know. I wish they'd stop doing that too. But, you know, it's just what they do. Now, getting back to how America responds to the British invasion, if you will, the technology that we've stolen from Great Britain, we begin to improve it. So we're able to make things quicker and faster here. America also has its own cheap labor source. Now, it's not slavery, because we're talking about the North, and it's not immigrants yet. It's women, the factory girls. In Lowell, Massachusetts, becomes the showplace of factories in America. Now, Lowell was not the original name of this city. It is changed in honor of the man who starts this, Francis Cabot Lowell. Now, in 1811, Mr. Lowell travels to England on a tour, but he's actually spying. He's going into the various water mills, and he's copying, when he can, how these various machines are made. Combing machines, the loom, which you see over here, and other machines that the British have invented. In 1812, war breaks out, and he's unable to come back to America until 1814. Here he's able to speak with businessmen in Massachusetts and banks and be able to show them that he's learned enough that he can actually start building these machines. And they give him loans, and they begin to build this massive factory. In fact, this is the first factory in all of America where every part of manufacturing will be done under one single roof. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Lowell will pass away, and it's when he dies that they rename the city after him, Lowell, Massachusetts. Now, the women. This was Mr. Lowell's idea. Of course, you can pay women less, but it was to be more than just that. It wasn't just a cheap labor source. It was also a way of really giving women a sense of independence. They built boarding houses, dorms, and they had curfews. They had no alcohol rule. They also gave class lectures on various subjects. A sort of education took place here. They gave them cultural activities like dancing and parties. So they had fun as well while they were here. These were usually young girls, some as young as 12 and 13 years of age, to their early 20s. It was often thought that once you were 21, 22, you would move on and go, live out the rest of your life. Sorry about that. They were paid less. There was a sense of independence, though, as I said, that came with this. I mean, for the first time, women were able to be the deciding factor with their own money. They were being paid. They were keeping bank accounts. They were showed how to do this, and they could do whatever they wanted with the money. Some women, and there's an example in our textbook of one young girl who only worked a few months, made enough money so she could buy some nice clothes. She went on a nice trip to Boston and went to some theaters, things that she had never done before, and truly enjoyed doing that. Other women worked for many years, and some paid for their families because the hard times that their families were going through, they helped their families. Others took their money and paid for more class lectures and tried to get themselves an education, what would be the equivalent of a college education. And many of the diaries of these young women that worked there survive to this day, and a lot of them talk about the fun that they had and again, the sense of pride. I think any one of us that have a job and are able to now become the deciding factor in our own finances, it does bring a sense of pride to you. And this was a huge moment in the history of women here in America. Okay, let's go ahead and let's talk about the last things we're going to talk about here. 3 systems that developed in our industry here at the beginning of our market revolution. And the first one we're going to look at is the network system. And I have a straw hat here for a reason. The network system was a rural manufacturing system. All right, rural means country, right? So this happened in the country areas. It's a system of industry, though. What they would do is you would have an entrepreneur of some sort, some man who has money, and he goes out and buys up a lot of raw material. And let's say the material to build a straw hat, because believe it or not, the straw hat industry was a major industry at this time period. Now, network. What he would do in the country, he would go out and hire workers from farm families. He would go out, let's say he lives in Virginia, or actually this is in the New England states, I should say, Massachusetts, Connecticut, upstate New York. There's a lot of farms out here, and families need money. So he would go out and hire several families from several different farms, perhaps 20 different farms, 30 different farms, and he would give them all the raw materials you need to make a straw hat. That's the network. He would have a network of farms that would make the straw hats for him. Once they've made the hats, he would go collect them, pay them for the work that they did, and then he sold them to the local stores. Then eventually, over time, they would be sold nationally. Many Southerners wore straw hats at this time period. It's a very popular hat. And all the straw hats they wore were made in New England farm system, or this network system that they had at the time period. So this was a type of industry that developed in the North. Another type, much more important, is the Outwork system. Here is where you have the beginning of what we call divisions of labor. And we'll use the example of the shoe industry because the shoe industry used division of labor this way in the Outwork system. Right, so what you would have, you would have skilled, unskilled workers would be used. Now these guys now are starting to replace artisans, men who work with their hands, and these farming families we were talking about. And now you're going to start having factories are going to emerge. But you would outsource the work. You would go to one factory, and this factory would get leather hides, and they would take the leather hides and they would cut it into soles or what was called uppers. And that's all this factory did. That's all they did. Then once they cut all the patterns to make a sole for a shoe or an upper for a shoe, then it would be outworked to another factory. This next factory would be what's called the binder factory. And in a lot of binderies, women worked. They would take these soles and they would sew in fabric linings in them. And that's all this factory did. Right? You following me? So one factory cuts leather into soles and uppers. Then they outworked it to a second factory, a bindery factory, binders, where women, what binding means is take fabric, lining, and sew it into the leather. Then they'd outwork it again to yet another factory that would take now these uppers and soles that have fabric sewed into them, and they created the shoes. But we're not done yet. Now this last factory would send them out to the stores. The store would package the shoe, and then they would sell the product. This is the outwork system of industry. We have division of labor going on here. Certain people, all they know how to do is cut leather. Other people, all they know how to do is sew fabric into the leather. The women in a bindery, they don't know how to cut leather patterns. The men who worked in the leather factory, who cut the leather into soles, they don't know how to sew fabric linings. Neither of these knew how to then take the uppers and the soles and create shoes out of them. So you have a division of labor taking place. And then the person that works in a store has no clue how any of this works, but they're the ones who's actually selling the shoe. And even within the store, you have people who are sales clerks, people who are cashiers, people who are managers. So you had even further division of labor taking place now. And then finally, this began to increase the power of what's now known as the boss. You have a boss in the leather factory. You have a boss in the bindery factory. You have a boss in the shoe factory. You have a boss in the central store. And the boss began to have all sorts of power now over his workers. Now, the workers weren't always paid a lot, but it kept creating more and more jobs. You are increasing output, and you are decreasing the price it is to create a shoe, thereby passing on that to the consumer. He's able to buy a shoe that's now cheaper. But the number one form of system now will be the factory system, and that's the one roof. Like in Lowell, Massachusetts, where we talk about the very first time where all forms of manufacturing will be produced under one roof, was in Lowell, Massachusetts. But this also now will spread to other types of industries. Obviously the textile, Lowell, Massachusetts. Flour mills, these are factories that take in all types of grains and grind them down and turn them into flour for baking purposes. They were one roof factory system industries. The meat packing, which is the picture I have of over here, pork packing in Cincinnati. This was a very big thing. What you have here is this picture basically trying to show us. You have on one floor all of the hogs are coming in on rails, and one guy, all he does is keeps them moving on the rails. Then all of a sudden you're in another area where workers are slicing the pigs open. That's all they do, is just cut the pig open. Then in another area, they're taking the pigs and they're taking out all the organs. That's all these individuals do. That's their whole job. They only take out organs. Then another section of the factory, they cut all the pig up into all kinds of pieces, cutting the meat for ham, for pork, for whatever the meat is. The final process at the bottom is the pickling. They would take pigs with all the pieces and put them in barrels, and they would literally pickle them and then send them out to various restaurants and stores all over. In this situation, since this is Cincinnati, this would be all over Ohio, right? You don't have refrigerating yet, so you're not able to send these nationally quite yet, because this is meat and it could spoil, nor do we quite have canning yet. But this is a huge moment where you can see really good division of labor taking place. There are individuals who only move the rails, there are individuals who only split the pig, individuals who only degut it, others who cut into pieces, and others who only know how to barrel it and pickle it. So the meat packing industry was a factory, one roof system. And then eventually you get coal burning steam factories begin to emerge, especially in what's known as the metal productions. Iron, copper, and brass were the first three metal production factories that we had in America, producing everything that Americans need that were made from iron, copper, or brass. And of course, the most famous would be, again, the weapons factories. Muskets were made this way in a factory system with one roof, where everything about a musket was put together in that one building. Later on, a man by the name of Samuel Colt will come along, and eventually, using this process, one of the greatest weapons in all of history, the 6-shooter gun, will be produced in the Colt factories. All of it done in this factory system. All right, so that's going to bring me to an end to part 1. Again, look on Edmodo for the new video log for this. Do not use the old video log. There are some specific questions I have that I want you to answer that's based on this video, and then I'll have another one for tomorrow's part 2. All right, I'll see everybody Monday.